1. Babaji and an extraordinary photography session. My Guru Maheshwarnath Babaji was not an ordinary man and possessed powers that the average human being cannot comprehend. At 20.5 years of age, I was aware of that, having spent over a year wandering with him in the Himalayas. The more I watched him at close quarters, the more I marveled at the wisdom and superhuman capacities of this enigma in human form. Whenever asked, he always said, "There are no miracles. Many laws of nature are still unknown to most of humanity. When someone who knows these laws operates them, and does something, then those who don't know think they are witnessing the miracle." I shall now relate one such instance and pen down the deeply significant dialogue that followed the event. I had been living with Babaji for over a year. We were staying in Rishikesh, on the other side of the Gangla, in a solitary cave. As you walk across the present Ramjula and cross the Gangla, the path towards the left leads to Laxmanjula, and the one on the right, after passing through the bazaar and crossing Gita Bhavan and Parmarth Nikitan on the left, continues to a wooded area. Turn left and you enter the forest that leads to Moyuni Baba's cave and beyond to Neelkanth. Further, on the right, on the banks of the Gangla are two caves. At the time that I am speaking of, most of the ashrams were small and the bazaar not as noisy and dirty as it is now. There were very few shops. All that changed with the arrival of the Beatles, for whom Maharishi Mahesh Yogi built air-conditioned caves to meditate in, and later the turning of Rishikesh into a weekend picnic spot for tourists, leaving the Devbhoomi strewn with plastic and plastered with blatant consumerism. In those days, when it was mainly a retreat for sadhus, you could find solitude even during the pilgrim season when a lot of people came to visit Badri, Kedar, Gangotri and Yamunotri. The caves I mentioned, tucked away in a remote corner on the banks of the great river, were ideal for the serious seeker. You can still see them. Recently, on my last visit, I saw that one of them had been whitewashed, fitted with a green metal door and was occupied by a handicapped, ex-serviceman, who told me that he was fed up with life. Babaji and I lived in this cave off and on. It was our practice to take a boat and cross to the other side in the evenings, to sit at the quiet ghat near the kutir of Swami Sivananda of the Divine Life Society and talk of various things until the lamps were lit and the arti was performed to the holy river. Babaji had an aversion to being photographed. In fact, knowing that I was an artist myself, he had prohibited me from drawing or painting his portrait. Though prohibited, I was still rebellious, and thought that I could get his photograph somehow, even if he did not want one taken. I had not yet fully understood that if he did not wish something to happen, it would not, no matter how much I, in my foolishness and ignorance, however well-meaning, wanted it to happen. So one evening, I secretly arranged for a photographer to come to the ghat, where Babaji and I would be either meditating or engaged in a dialogue. I had befriended a photographer, a young Garhwali from Dehradun named Prashant Rawat. Several days ago, we had agreed that he would come around 5 p.m. to the Sivananda Ghat on a certain day. He was to pretend to be a stranger, a tourist, casually click a photograph of Babaji and disappear quietly. He said he was going to Dehradun, but would travel back to Rishikesh on the appointed day and do the needful. He was as eager to get Babaji's picture as I was and took it as a challenge. On that particular evening, my only fear was that Babaji would cancel the walk. He did not. "Madhu, let's cross to the other side and sit on the steps of the Sivananda Ghat, your favorite spot," he said. So, we sat on the steps facing the river and Babaji reminisced about old Rishikesh, when there were no big ashrams, except the Swargashram. Swami Sivananda had not as yet founded the Divine Life Society and lived in a small kutir, on the other side, belonging to the Swargashram. People called him Dr. Swami because he treated sick sadhus. I asked him a few questions about Laxmanjula and Purani Jali and he answered them. Then, the discussion went on to certain personal matters regarding sadhana. I was becoming a little restless and anxious as there was no sign of Rawat, the photographer. 1 hour passed and still no Rawat in sight. Finally, Babaji looked into my eyes and said in a matter-of-fact way, "No point in getting distracted and restless, Madhu. That photographer of yours won't come." I was stunned. Babaji, I am sorry. I will never again commit such a mistake. You know my thoughts even before I start thinking them. Please forgive me. I burst into tears. Babaji patted my back. "It's all right," he said, "control yourself. Not a big crime and you learnt a good lesson anyway. Come, let's go back before it gets too dark." Soon, we were sitting in front of the cave facing the Gangla. The sun had painted the sky a beautiful pink. "Now," said Babaji, "do you think that your photographer could have taken a picture without my concurrence?" "No, and I'll tell you why. Look at me now." I shifted my gaze from the flowing waters and looked in his direction. "Oh!" I exclaimed loudly, surprised by what I saw. Instead of his body, all I could see was a gray, translucent silhouette. Babaji's voice, which now came from the shadowy outline, continued. "How do you see an object? Light falls on an object and its reflected rays fall on the lens of your eyeballs and an image is formed. It's the same for a camera. The light is reflected onto the camera lens and the image falls on the film. Well, what if we know how to prevent the light rays from reflecting back and instead absorb them into our bodies? A powerful mind tuned to the stillness of the Supreme Self, the core of our consciousness, can control the light rays, absorb them and not let them reflect. You would then see only a gray, translucent outline and not the body you are familiar with. Under dimly lit conditions, you would not even see the outline. That's exactly what I am doing now. Not letting the light rays reflect. The camera would not have captured the image, if I so desired." I said, "Got the message, Babaji, please reappear in the form I love to see." In an instant, he was back in his usual form. "So," I asked, "is this how yogis disappear?" "Mostly," said Babaji, "but there is one more method where one actually disintegrates the primary particles of the body temporarily, but only most advanced yogis can do that." "Please, can you explain, Babaji?" "The primary particles that make up both animate and inanimate matter are called quarks. Quantum physics, having demolished the absolute certainty of Newtonian physics, is now faced with an enigma called the theory of uncertainty. The primary substance that goes to form matter cannot now be pronounced with certainty to be either particles or waves. Strangely, when observed they tend to shift from particles to waves and vice versa. When they are observed behaving like particles, they suddenly start behaving like waves. Some physicists even advance the theory that their behavior depends on the observer. However, the great rishis hold that consciousness is the primary core of all existence and that at the deepest level, it can change particles to waves or waves to particles at will. A completely tranquil mind, which the Vajrayana Buddhists call the vacuous mind, is in tune with this core of all existence. A yogi, established in that state, can change the particles of his body to waves which become invisible to the organs of perception like the eyes, etc. The yogi can then travel to other locations and convert back into visible particle-based forms. This is not easy and only great beings like Sri Guru Babaji can practice this kind of disintegration and reintegration. To put it simply, dissolution of the body into its primary elements and regathering them at will to form the body again. Nothing to do with optical illusions performed on stage by illusionists. Babaji, Can I also learn to do this? Babaji laughed. You have to go a long way, my son. Do your kriya and meditate for some time before the reality of hunger begins to gnaw at your insides. We sat together, still facing the great river, and went into deep meditation until darkness fell all around us, but we were absorbed in the inner light that is self-illumined and blissful.